Welcome to AK Recap. Today I'm going to explain the movie called Emancipation. Released in the year 2022. Peter, his wife Dodienne, and their kids are all slaves in a cotton farm in 1863. When he finds out he has been sold, he spends the last time with his family in prayer before the white men arrive and haul him away, disregarding the cries of the kids. Peter yells and struggles against their control, but when the guys point their gun at Dodienne, Peter immediately stops and agrees to climb on the cart on his own 2 feet. Sadly, the men began to attack him anyway before dragging him once more because they wanted revenge. While being taken in a cage with a number of other slaves, Peter makes a promise to his children that he will return for them in the future through the bars as the children try to flee in tears. They travel for a considerable amount of time before reaching their new workplace, which happens to be a railroad being built. The living situation are 100 times worse than on a plantation. The head of the slaves who dared to rebel decorate the entryway as a warning. They sleep in cages, and even when they are acting properly and working hard, the white owners won't think twice before hitting and abusing them. Even worse, they use the Bible as evidence to support their behavior. There are also many stray dogs in the area, which are sent after any slaves who attempt to flee. When a slave acts incorrectly, they may receive a simple whipping, a quick shot in the middle of the field, or even a brand on the face from their master, Fassel. Harrington and Knowles, who was also purchased as a slave but was chosen to join the guards due to his hunting prowess, serve as Fassel's right hands. Peter tries his best to act appropriately, but even when he tries to assist Gordon after he falls, he is reprimanded for trying something that isn't working. One evening, after all the slaves have been returned to their cages, they must witness John being tossed inside while writhing in discomfort due to his brand on his cheek. Tomas, a slave, is shaking in terror, and Peter tries to reassure him by telling him to think of his loved ones and to consider this to be simply work. He also offers them the message of God, who is continually keeping watch over them, but John mocks him because it is obvious that there is no God who cares about them. However, Peter remains unaffected by the teasing and assures John that he would pray for him. Later, Peter overhears 2 white guards discussing some crucial news. Lincoln has freed the slaves, and now all of those who were able to flee are making their way to Baton Rouge for assistance. When a guard realizes Tomas made a mistake with the meal and is about to reprimand him, the discussion is suddenly cut short by Peter defending Tomas and pointing out that he is only a little child. The guard beats him before pulling out his gun and preparing to shoot Peter for his attitude, but Fassel stops him because he has developed a special interest in Peter. Later, when Peter is back in the cage, Fassel approaches him and informs him that he is now his god and Peter is his dog, to which Peter responds that he should be fed the same meat as the dogs. Fassel only smiles at that moment, but the next day he ties Peter and makes him kneel in front of him while his dog continues to snarl and howl at Peter from just a few inches away. Peter's fragrance is now permanently etched in the dog's memory. Peter later talks to the other slaves over lunch about Lincoln and Baton Rouge, which they could reach after 5 days of swamp walking. Because it's difficult to survive in the wetlands, some of the slaves are unwilling, but when Peter says that they probably won't survive here too, he gains the backing of a few guys. They simply need to wait for the ideal opportunity to run. Later, while a slave was still working, he passed away, and the guards made Peter drag him to the pit where they dumped all the bodies. When other white deserters observe Peter, they suggest that a black guy should do the digging instead, thus Peter ends up grabbing a shovel to fill in the pit. Peter understands this is his best opportunity to execute the plan, so he waits patiently for the guards to become disoriented by an explosion on the field before leaping on them to use the shovel to kill them and snatch the knife before leaving. When the other slaves and the deserters notice this, they take advantage to begin running as well. They hit a few guards in the process, which gave John the opportunity to steal a gun. As soon as other guards sound the alarm, they start firing at the runners to get rid of as many as they can before they get lost in the forest. Fassel kills the deserters himself while engaging in some shooting of his own. Hating that Peter got away with it, Fassel orders Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to pursue Peter. Peter is able to form a group with 3 of his buddies, and by keeping an eye out for any impending risks, he leads them through the forest. When they eventually locate the wetlands, the majority of the squad easily crosses them, but Tomas freezes when he sees the crocodiles, allowing the dogs to catch up with him. When the dogs have caused enough damage, Fassel calls the group back and requests to know their destination. Tomas, however, declines to provide an answer. Fassel responds by making a deal. He'll let Tomas leave if he informs him where the others are heading. Tomas, who is in great fear, confesses his knowledge and is indeed let to enter the swamp, but as soon as he turns around, Fassel shoots him and allows the crocodiles to devour him. Peter, John, and Gordon have now successfully completed their passage of the marsh. Peter advises them to take the other path, but John won't listen to orders and chooses to take the horse trail instead, feeling confident in his ability to keep safe thanks to the rifle he took. Gordon wants to follow Peter everywhere he goes, but Peter believes that if they separate, it would be more difficult to find them. As a result, Gordon makes his own path through the woods after Peter reminds him to listen for the sound of Lincoln's cannons. Peter then starts going his own way but soon realizes his leg is bleeding since he was actually hit by a gunshot. In order to put some distance between himself and Fassel, he needs to run for a bit. He needs to act quickly because else the dogs will scent the blood. Later, Peter comes across a white family's home that also houses slaves. Peter sneaks around by hiding behind a pile of logs after first grabbing a vine from a tree to tie over his wound as a tourniquet. This enables him to see the clothing hanging from a rope and grab for some water at the pump. Peter runs into the forest after crossing the garden and stealing a shirt, but one of the family's children spots him and rings a bell to let everyone know. Fassel hears the noise and follows it to the house, where the residents inform him of Peter's departure way. Peter is moving as quickly as he can, barely pausing to use the shirt he stole to bind his wound. Later, as he conceals himself beneath the swamp water, he removes the bloodied shirt and places it in a trunk for the dogs to locate. When Fassel and his men fall for the ruse, they proceed along the road believing Peter has crossed the water when, in fact, he emerges after the company has left. A crocodile decides to attack him at that very moment, but Peter reacts quickly and pushes it away with a thick branch before slaying it with his knife. At the moment, we see Dodienne awakens at that same moment from a nightmare in which she had seen her spouse in peril. The children awaken as well and worry for their father, but Dodienne assures them that he is alive and will arrive soon because he has endured hardships that no other man has. When night falls, Peter hides on top of a tree and cuts the swamp leeches from his body with his knife, dripping some blood on the nearby plants. When Fassel and his men discover the dead crocodile and open it, they discover it to be empty, indicating that Peter escaped through this opening. Harrington really commends Peter for his prowess when the gang decides to camp out for the night and feast on the crocodile. Fassel reprimands him for it right away and reminds him of the lesson his father taught him: if you give black people even a small amount of something, they will demand more and take things like their jobs and their lands. The following morning, Peter keeps running and makes sure to keep his body covered in dirt and animal waste, which attracts flies but also masks his scent. He considers his family as he crosses another marsh, prays to his Lord to keep the dread of the monsters at bay, and sees it as a sign when the sun unexpectedly beams on him. Peter is fortunate to come across an abandoned treehouse with clean water and some leftover food as Fassel divides his squad to cover more area. Peter heats up his knife on some hot coals to cauterize his leg wound. There are also some hot coals nearby. In order to scare the bees away and let Peter get some honey, he places the coals on the empty bucket and carries it with him as he climbs a tree. By throwing the smoke at the beehive, he is able to get some honey without the bees' help. When Fassel notices the smoke, he starts riding toward it, but Peter has already left. Dodienne's master approaches her in the meantime and informs her that he has sold her and that she will leave in 2 days. However, because her new master will provide her with a new husband, she is not permitted to take her kids with her. Dodienne makes a very risky decision to prevent being sold because she is deeply saddened by the news and yet wants to wait here for her husband to return. She approaches a cotton producing machine and pretends to be caught in an accident by putting her hand inside. With the use of his dog's nose, he returns to Fassel and uses it to locate the treehouse. He also uses it to follow Peter as he crosses the river. Peter rushes to enter the woods, where he is shocked to run across John again. John is upset because the white guys would now pursue him as well, too, so he is angry. Peter assures John that he is not being followed and shows him how to disguise his scent, but John ignores him before they resume their run. They quickly rush to hide when they hear the dogs barking. John climbs to the top of a tree while Peter enters an empty trunk. Even yet, the dogs are able to track John's smell, making it simple for Fassel and his men to locate him. John won't get down, so Fassel shoots him to knock him to the ground before demanding information on Peter with force. John still won't speak, though. In order to send a message back to camp, Fassel chooses to take his head and offer it to Harrington and Knowles. Peter says a prayer for John's soul and closes his eyes to avoid seeing his friend die. When it starts to rain, Peter comes out of the trunk after waiting a few hours to put some space between himself and Fassel. However, when he does, he finds out exactly how they killed John, which shocks him to his core. He struggles to keep moving while grieving, but then all of a sudden, he notices many horses rushing by, one of which is on fire. Peter finds a house on a plantation in the direction they came from, but everything is on fire and all the white people are dead. It appears the local slaves were aware of the news from Lincoln and decided to take matters into their own hands. Peter enters the home with his knife ready just in case. He makes his way carefully through the rooms until he reaches to the dining table, where he immediately abandons all prudence in favor of tucking into the food and wine to refuel his weary body. He keeps going and doesn't stop until he hears an odd noise coming from above. He then investigates the sounds and eventually finds a dying girl trapped beneath a harp, which she is playing as a call to rescue. Peter comes to her aid right away, takes her outdoors, and lays her down on a table before attempting to get some water. However, the girl is frightened and forces him to remain as she hands him her cross pendant. Peter accepts it and knows what she needs, a prayer assuring her that God is with her. When Harrington approaches, Peter is so preoccupied that he doesn't hear him coming until it's too late. In order to avoid being shot, Peter must put down his knife and back away from the girl. After leaving the girl, she immediately passes away, and Peter is so enraged that he dares to turn around and kill Harrington by using the cross as a stake. When Knowles shows up at that time, Peter reacts quickly and snatches Harrington's gun to shoot him. Knowles tries to convince Peter that a person who can kill a crocodile might be included in Fassel's ranks, but Peter dismisses him as the worst type and abandons him to perish. Peter decides to flee into the cotton fields for safety after hearing Fassel approaching due to the dog's barking, and when the dog gets too close, he shoots it. When Fassel eventually finds the body, it just strengthens his resolve to catch Peter. The following morning, Peter lands at a beach covered in the remains of white men who died in battles with Lincoln's army. Although they don't have any supplies for him to take, Peter can see the ships and hear the cannons in the distance, which show that Lincoln's soldiers are nearby. Excited by the prospect of achieving freedom, Peter starts to run once more when a horse suddenly appears by his side and knocks him to the ground. It is Fassel who begs Peter to beg for some of the meat he had previously requested back in the cage. Fassel pulls out his gun and reminds Peter that he is his god because Peter won't comply, but someone shoots Fassel before he can pull the trigger. Peter turns to face his rescuers, the Lincoln's native guard led by Lieutenant Caillou, and informs the falling body that he is not a deity. Finally, Peter's body succumbs to hunger and tiredness, and the soldiers carry him to the medical tent at their camp in Baton Rouge. The nun nurse makes Peter residential because his leg wound is infected, and for a few days Peter doesn't do anything but dream about his family. When Peter feels better, he visits one of the soldiers to obtain his new documents as a free man, albeit he must make up some details, such as age, that he is unsure of. The white soldiers use the fact that the slaves are technically stolen contraband to offer them two options: they either work on the federal fields or join the army. Unfortunately, he isn't yet allowed to go and look for his family. Peter rejects, continuing to obey commands, but when the soldier explains that enlisting in the army will enable him to rescue himself permanently and rescue his family, Peter agrees to do so. Peter then learns that Gordon has been located by the army as well, and that he is wounded but still alive. Although Peter is happy to see him, telling him about John makes him uncomfortable. Peter is then asked whether he would be interested in supporting the cause by posing for something called a picture before being instructed to meet Caillou for his uniform. Peter is suspicious, but Caillou assures him that the white photographers are good people with good motives. Peter agrees to expose his bare back to the camera, revealing the scars from hundreds of whippings. It turns out that these men are photographing the truth of slavery to inform the public. Peter is then taken to visit the general, who queries him about any knowledge he may have regarding the railroad the enemy is constructing. The general points out that Peter's scars are a sign of disobedience, which is a bad trait in the military, as he looks at his image after Peter has finished sharing all the information he has. Caillou tries to remove Peter, but Peter fights back and says that even though he's been beaten up numerous times, he never quit fighting, which is equally crucial for a soldier. At first light, Caillou leads Peter and all of his soldiers to the front lines, where he delivers an emotional speech reminding them that they are fighting for freedom. While they are still moving, numerous soldiers are killed by enemy fire, but the gang seems unfazed and continues to battle anyhow. As soon as there is fire all around them, an explosion hits, knocking Peter out for a short while and leaving him asleep in a puddle. As soon as he awakens, he drags his sore body through the mud to continue aiding, firing at the opposition whenever he has the chance, and praying for any dying companions he comes across along the route. Battle sees Caillou fall, and Peter ultimately locates a wounded Gordon as well. Seeing his friend in such agony and despair prompts Peter to emerge from his hiding place and flee toward the enemy lines. His goal is to halt the cannons, and because so many other troops take him as an example and do the same, the native guard is able to defeat their adversaries and win the day. The army goes to every plantation to free the slaves now that the war is finished. Everyone is astonished and unable to believe the news when they first arrive at the house where Peter used to work, but once they realize liberation is actually true, elation quickly replaces their shock and disbelief. Peter starts hunting for his family after witnessing his previous master die at the hands of justice and nearly breaks down when he is unable to locate them. But as he murmurs a prayer, looking to his side, he sees his wife and children running to greet him with a hug. He then lets God lead him to them. The image of the genuine Peter went on to become an iconic piece of history and to travel extensively. Lincoln's Declaration allowed more than 400,000 black people to flee to freedom in 1863. Nearly 4 million American slaves had been declared free by 1865. The movie ends here. Please like and subscribe my channel.